Moonshine Jesus, nobody in the sky. Moonshine Jesus, baby, alright. Moonshine Jesus, a surprising delight. Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello, and welcome to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us today for our look at Jordan Peele's Us. It's Halloween, so we've been trying to stick with some spookier sci-fi fantasy stuff. But before we move into that, well, I should tell you, and it's particularly important in Us because there are some interesting things going on in it. There will be spoilers here, and we will probably spoil the biggest spoilable thing about this show. So just know that that's going on. If you'd like to see it without spoilers, just bookmark this and come back and visit us later. And while you're out there bookmarking stuff, go visit our sponsor, progressivechristianity.org. As I always say, it's a great place for all your progressive Christian needs and resources. Go check them out. Of course, check us out on Facebook. Follow our page there and make sure that you're signed up to get our podcasts when they drop at all your favorite podcast outlets. More importantly than all of that, welcome to my good buddy Caleb, who the show wouldn't be the show without. How you doing, sir?
Oh, thank you, Mark. I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to get into this. It's fun to come back for like the second week to a Jordan Peele thing.
Absolutely.
I'm excited about this.
Absolutely. And he's just brilliant. So this is so much fun. So much to talk about. But before we get started, we should also make sure that we have a nice, beautiful beverage to do the show with.
Yes, that's important.
Curious, what kind of beverage have you decided to have?
Okay, so I was inspired by the whole notion of doppelgangers, which is very important in us.
Very important.
And so I don't know if you know this about me, Mark, but I do like to drink like Coke, like Coca-Cola. And so I was thinking about a doppelganger of Coca-Cola. I thought I'm going to have a Jack and Coke. So very, very classy. Just
looks like
Jack
a Coke.
and Coke. And yeah, it's dark. I think that's appropriate for this theme. And I'm not sure which one is the evil one and which one is the good one, so it fits in very nicely with us.
I like it.
How about you?
Like it. Well, red, as you can tell in our header, if you're watching this live, if you're listening online, red is a very important color in this movie. A matter of fact, the doppelganger of what I would call the main character, her name we find out in the credits is actually Red. And so I decided to go with a red drink. I'm calling it the red flag because there's so many red flags in this movie that they should have been picking up on. And it's bourbon, Luxardo, cherry liqueur, and grenadine. And then I've went with the double. I've got a dark cherry garnish, but I also gave the dark cherry a doppelganger in there as well. So we both went a little bit with that doppelganger theme there. So cheers to you, sir.
Cheers, Mark.
That'll do, man. It should make for a good show. All right, we'll have a quick drop and we'll catch y'all on the other side.
Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, Moonshine Jesus, won't you shine a light?
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show, where today we are talking about Jordan Peele's Us. Last week we talked about Jordan Peele's Nope, and it's kind of fun to follow up to that with Us. So we do this segment where we kind of geek out a little bit. We have fun talking about the show itself. And then in the next segment, we get into the theology and politics. So make sure that you hang around for that. So if you're not familiar with Us, it came out in 2019, and it's an American psychological horror film, of course, written and directed by Jordan Peele. And the film follows Adelaide, or Addie, Wilson, who's played expertly by Lupita Nyong'o, who is just incredible. And it follows her and her family, who are attacked by a group of menacing doppelgangers one of whom she met in a funhouse when she was a young child 33 years before. So I do think that in this segment, we ought to talk about the big reveal. But before we get to that,
Yeah.
I want to start with the fact, Mark, that you and I have both discussed that we're not big horror people.
Right.
So I'm curious, what did you think about this movie? Did you enjoy it? And did you think it was a good horror movie?
Yeah, I actually, I very much enjoyed it. I wouldn't call it well, I guess it is a horror movie, but the horror parts didn't really get to me, you know, the jump scares and the gore and all of that kind of stuff. I would put this more as a psychological thriller kind of movie that happens to be set in a horrific kind of setting. But I actually did enjoy it, but more about what was going on and kind of thinking through the psychology of all the characters and what they were dealing with and facing and everything. Did you find it to be horror-ish or what?
I kind of did. So full confession, I'd been working up the courage to watch this show for a long time.
Right,
I had watched Get Out, and I thought, I want to watch this. So I had read about it. I kind of knew what the plot was going to be. And I was still kind of scared while I was watching. I was telling my wife, I'm like, it's kind of a horrifying show. And there's not a lot of lighthearted moments to deaden the intensity.
Yeah,
and there's some
ones, but they're not big, and they're really they hit and they leave.
They're short. I mean, I think about like the dad's boat that doesn't work. You know, there's some
and they're all standing on the dock making fun of him, and
right. And he thinks they're there to take his boat, and the daughter's like, "No one wants your boat, Dad." You know, there are a few moments, but it's also very intense. I mean, you know, from one scene to the next, there's not a lot of space to breathe. And so I thought it was a good movie. I thought it was also a good horror movie because it was intense. So, Mark, I want to get to the big reveal because I think this is important. So the big reveal is that Red, who is Addie Wilson's doppelganger, is actually the real Addie Wilson, who we followed into the funhouse at the beginning of the movie, where she meets her doppelganger, right? Yeah. So this is something I want to make sure we get to because I'm curious how you feel about this. So we see the Addie Wilson go into the funhouse. We find out that, you know, her doppelganger replaced her, and we've been following the doppelganger throughout most of the movie and rooting for her. So I'm curious, Mark, who should we root for in Us? Who's the hero? Whose side are we to be on?
I think maybe we're not supposed to be on anyone's side, and maybe that's part of what we're supposed to learn, is that picking sides is what destroys a nation, destroys a community, destroys even a family, is picking sides. So I think it's supposed to get us thinking enough to realize we were cheering for the person that we really thought was the bad guy and found out that it was the main character. We thought they were the best, and that they were in it, and that they actually came from a different place that was a little more impoverished and struggling, and that we were cheering for them the whole time. And we were fine with doing that until we found out that that's who we were cheering for. So I kind of feel like the lesson is you shouldn't be picking sides. You should recognize that we're all in this together and that we should always be rooting for everybody. I don't know. That'd be my quick take on it. What about you?
I think Red mirrors that whenever she first meets the family. And of course we find out the reason her voice is so hoarse and stuff is because she got strangled by the doppelganger. But she says, I've thought so many times about how you could have taken me with you, or how this could have turned out differently, how we could have lived together. So that leads me to another question, Mark, and that's, why didn't the doppelgangers just leave? Like, why do you think they stayed down there? Why didn't they were able to leave at the to go and go out into the real world? Right. Why do you think that they stayed down there?
Well, I'm not sure that they did. I think that there's a possibility that they did show up but they stayed in the shadows. She was the only one that could communicate. All the rest of the doppelgangers, or he called them tethers, all the tethers couldn't speak until, and that should have been one of the red flags. We should have realized as soon as she started speaking, wait a minute, why can one speak when the other ones can't? Should have shown up. So I think they did it because they needed a leader who would go out and could communicate and kind of proclaim who they were and add meaning to what they were planning, because they clearly were planning their own version of Hands Across America long ago, and were ready to make it happen. But they needed a leader, and until she was able to establish herself as their leader, and I think her ability to speak was probably one of the things that made them realize, aha, this could be our person. I don't know. I mean, that's stretching it a little bit, but I think that's why.
I mean, and I guess that, Red says that they were born special, and that she somehow managed to figure out how to get out of this underground tunnel place and meet her tether, her doppelganger. And so she then, strangled the real Addie unconscious, and so and dragged her down there. So she might not necessarily know how to get out, but I don't know. That was one of the issues for me in the film. Is it kind of felt like they could leave at any time, which leads me to one of my other questions that I need help resolving, Mark, around this, and that's the white rabbit imagery I thought was interesting. They follow a white rabbit down the hole, right? Yeah. So Alice in Wonderland kind of analogy here. But we find out that the doppelgangers, the tethers, are eating these white rabbits raw. Tell me this, Mark. Where are all the rabbits coming from that they're eating?
Well, rabbits reproduce like rabbits, right?
Like rabbits?
So, no, I mean, I think that's the whole thing. That's why we see those cages early on with them in it. Like, we get one little moment where we see it before it all falls apart. And so, we learned that these tethers were created by them, is all they're named as, although and I'll mention this again later, kind of government vibes from just the way everything looked. But that what they were created for didn't work out, and they got kind of abandoned. And I think that the rabbits were always meant to be this kind of ever abundant food source. I'm not sure that they were eating them raw originally, but they're caretakers, because we do see that they're not they're because of their lack of resources. They're at least because of that, their mental abilities aren't as broad as the folks who are their doppelganging. And so maybe they're not able to actually figure out how to cook. And maybe someone did for a while, and then the rabbits get out. And I think that's kind of, it's meant to show how wild the whole thing is, because they've been abandoned by the very people who created the situation that they're in. I'm kind of pulling at straws a little bit there, but that might be
because I mean, there are thousands of people in the tunnels, and they're eating the rabbits 3 meals a day. Those rabbits would have to be really reproducing.
It's a lot. I think we are supposed to think of the underground as being everywhere. It's not just underneath that carnival, or it's everywhere. And so maybe it's that there's enough in each area to, I don't know.
Maybe. I like
Who
that.
knows?
Okay, so Mark, we've talked about 2 of the 3 Jordan Peele horror, sci-fi, social commentary genre that he has kind of pioneered. I'm curious, how do you think Us falls? How does it rank in that trinity of Jordan Peele movies?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
I'm going to put it, I actually think I feel bad about saying this out loud. I think his first one was his best one, and this being his second one was the next best. And then the movie we covered last week, I think, is the next. I think they're all absolutely fantastic. I really genuinely do.
Mhm.
They're fantastic in different ways. The first one's more in your face, deal with it, and struggle with this. This one is a lot more kind of, boy, there are so many metaphors that you can throw into this and try to pull insight out of. So yeah, I would go 1, 2, 3 in the order that they were created. I mean, how about you? Where would you?
That's exactly how I
Yeah?
would rank them.
Yeah.
Yes, I think
Same
those
reasoning, or
they're all very different movies,
they are
and
very much so.
all kind of slightly different subgenres within the
I
genre
agree.
that he has
Mhm.
created. I and doing different things, but
Right.
yeah, I think I think they land differently and are certainly making different commentaries. And so I think Get Out is particularly strong because perhaps because it is the first
I mean,
of this and it's so
pretty sure
unexpected.
I'm pretty sure he won Best Screenplay.
Yeah, he did. He won an
Yeah.
Oscar.
So I mean,
for it. Yeah,
that tells
yeah.
you right there how good it is, right?
Right. Yes. I mean, it's unexpected. You have no way of figuring this out. As you say, in this, we see some red flags throughout. That does make it fun to go back through and watch. But
Yeah.
I think that they Get Out. You don't see as many of those things. It's kind of surprising, and the commentary was kind of a new thing. I think that makes it
Very
surprising.
much.
In Us, yeah. They're red flags. I think that's interesting. And since you brought it up, Mark, we've got a minute or so. Can you tell me some of the red flags that you saw upon realizing that this was really
my favorite one, because it bugged me throughout the moment it happened. It bugged me the rest of the show until the reveal happened that it was actually Red that had been there the whole time. Was when she turned to her son in the car and told Jason, it was like, Jason, snap to the beat.
Yeah.
And he did, but she wasn't. If you were paying attention, it was off. And I was like, well, that's weird. Why would Peele put that in there? I can't quite figure out what's going on. That it's so important, and then she's not doing it right. Like, that seemed like a weird detail to have in the show. And then once the reveal was there, I was like, oh, I see. That was one of those moments that were supposed to make us kind of realize, oh, something's not quite right here. Something's off. But all I knew was it was weird. I didn't realize I was supposed to recognize that meant something was off. Did you have any that you really thought stood out?
And in all fairness, I knew she was the doppelganger the whole time because I read ahead of time.
I had no idea.
My own fear.
Me.
Yeah.
Right.
So I spent the whole time looking for how I should know that she's the doppelganger.
Oh, okay.
And so
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm
so it was kind of like a watching back through, and knowing the ending. And so whenever she was talking about how she couldn't make conversation, about when we saw the flashbacks of the girl not talking, I thought, oh, well, she didn't know how to talk. Whenever I heard her doing those initial kills and kind of making the guttural kind of sound, like the other tethered people were when they were killing, I saw that. And so
it just made me think of the parents meeting with the teacher or principal and saying, or the psychologist saying, when will she start talking again? When will she?
Right.
I didn't.
She hasn't been to Nam. Why can't she talk?
Right.
And I thought, oh, it's because she doesn't know how, because she's tethered. And so, so I kind of was thinking back through, like, what would this experience have been like had I not known that information ahead of time? But it was interesting to go back through to watch knowing the big reveal, because it was it was clear that he was broadcasting that to us, but in a very subtle way that you would only know if you knew the ending.
Yeah.
So I've got a number of other questions I'd love to talk about, but we can't because one of the unique things about Jordan Peele is that he's got a lot of social commentary stuff and theological stuff. So let's listen to it drop. Let's come back. Let's talk about theology and politics.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. You're joining us for our Theo Politico segment. And I'll be honest, Caleb, we're probably going to lean pretty heavy to the Politico on this just because
That makes sense.
There's so much to cover and there's so many things I want to flesh out a little bit here. So, but that said, let's also go ahead and jump right in. So the tethers were created by, like I said earlier, a sort of a nebulous them, which I got that kind of government vibes. It sounds like maybe you did too. And they were created to control their other selves, right?
Right.
So I'm curious, what kind of things do you see in the world that our, let's call them less than nebulous them, do to try to control the population?
Yeah, so I mean, I think we see. I think at its heart, this is commentary on class, and I think the government tries to reinforce that. I mean, and I think we see this through things as simple as redlining. If we look at like ways that districts are drawn up and who gets elected, and then the ways that those people who are elected reestablish laws or reinforce laws that put people kind of into class categories. I think we see that a lot. So I think that that there's a lot of classism in this movie, and I think there's a lot of classism in our society. And as much as we like to talk about the American dream and how anything is possible for anybody, we really have people in positions of authority and power and wealth who really don't want that to happen, and make it a policy that it's very difficult for certain groups of people to rise out of their social station at all, despite the narrative that we have. That's one of the ways that I see that happening. Where do you see the thems?
Right. Well, I agree completely with what you were talking about. I mean, we do see the government setting up rules and regulations, and even like you said, red lines and stuff to keep people in their class system. And no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, they're just not going to be able to get out. At least almost no one will. But I also feel like this is one of the things that really bothers me. And we talk about trying to control people. I think that our school systems are failing us over and over again. And they are helping create what the GOP has become. Our school systems, there are clearly exceptions, and there are ones that do a great job. They teach by saying, here are the facts. I'm telling them to you. Now learn them and spit them back out to me. It isn't really based so much on here's how you discern something. Here are multiple facts. Now let's think about how do we put those together? How do we make sense of them? How do we point to reality out of those? We've got decades of folks who have been taught that what being smart, what learning is about is listening to an authority figure at what they say is the truth, memorizing it, and then repeating it. And I think that that's how we end up with masses that follow the GOP or any kind of a movement that actually have actions that hurt the folks that are following them because they have been indoctrinated in a system that teaches them just do what they say, right? Repeat what they say, and that's all you need to do. And you don't even have to learn how to think through whether or not those actions are actually hurting us. I think that that's a really frightening thing that is going on in the U.S. right now.
That's a really good point, Mark. And kudos to all the public school teachers out there who have very little control over that, and most of whom hate these standardized tests and stuff like that, and want to teach people how to become critical thinkers, but are not able to because of these kinds of restrictions that are
Yep.
imposed upon them. And yeah, I 100% agree that it's scary that
It is.
that instead of teaching people how to actually engage with the information, it is all about whether or not you can regurgitate
Well, and we
or
could
not.
we could talk about other things that are going on that we see the government
Sure.
doing, that it's actually controlling people and forcing them to be certain things. So my next question then is, just to keep walking down this line, is, so what does that say? And you're going to be thrilled that I'm asking you this question. What does that say, if anything, about free will?
Yes.
Maybe the movie's making a statement of any kind about free will as well.
Yeah. So I think that yes. So I do think it's interesting. I love the fact that a Presbyterian is asking me about
I
free
figured
will.
you would,
As
right?
always, Mark. Yes, I appreciate that. So so yeah, I think that in terms of the movie, that the movie is saying that our free will, to some extent, is determined by our circumstances, right? And so like the folks who are the tethers, who are living underground, their free will is kind of taken away from them because they don't have the same opportunities as the people who are living above ground. Right. So the people who are in lower classes that don't have the same kind of opportunity as people in higher classes. And I think that's true. And so I think we see that obviously in our real world too, that people who are struggling just to survive, people who are trying to make ends meet, aren't afforded the same kinds of opportunities to be who they want to be, to advance in the ways they want to advance, as people who have the wealth to be able to do that, and the political capital to be able to do that. So yeah, I think the movie's making that commentary, and I think it's very true for our society. What do you think?
I completely agree. I think there's no doubt that the movie's making that commentary, and one of the main things I believe Peele wants us to struggle with. I mean, he even has Red say, "Without soul, there's no free will," just to kind of point us a little bit towards there's some commentary about free will going on here, and it's very clear that part of the message is what you were just saying, is that particularly when you're in a what we would call a lower class, a class whose privileges have been more constrained and taken away from them compared to other classes, that your ability to exercise your full free will is being more heavily impacted by other people than folks in higher classes, where they have less rules and less regulations and less people trying to force them to be a particular type of person. So considering that the tethers were created to control us, or at least people representing us, but they ended up being mostly controlled by us. Ultimately, we have those scenes of where whatever's happening. We have these scenes of what's happening up top, infecting the folks who are in what would be the lower class, even underneath the ground, in the way it's presented. Do you think that Peele's making any kind of commentary about how we involuntarily are impacting the free will of folks who are, particularly folks that are in middle to upper classes, are involuntarily impacting the free will of folks in other classes? And then I'm going to add just one more little twist.
Of course you are. Yes.
Knowing that at the end of it, we got that beautiful twist where Red is actually in the upper class, and we see everything changing for Red. Is Peele also trying to give us any message about how it's necessary to turn the tables on those who are trying to control us? Because we see someone successfully doing that and changing their life because of it. And then finally, is there anything biblical about that?
Yes, yes, and yes. So I think so. Ideally, in a democracy, we have the government by the consent of the governed, and so we are all supposed to be participating in the democracy.
Right.
However, the way that the United States has come about, that is not the way that it really has happened. That those who have had power, those who have had wealth, are the ones who remain in charge, and it
Yeah.
affects people who don't have as much. And so, even though, as I said earlier, we tout this narrative where everyone can succeed, where everyone has an equal voice, is just not true. It just isn't true. And so, yeah, I think Peele is saying that we need to have a system that enables folks to be able to come up, and maybe what that involves is people from who have been disinherited, as Howard Thurman says, or people who have been marginalized, people who have had their rights, their wealth taken away. That those people are given power, just as Red or as the person who became Addie was in the film. That we need to see that happen so that everyone can kind of claim their full human dignity. And yeah, there's certainly some biblical stuff here, Mark,
Right.
because that's what Jesus's message was about. Jesus's message was about people who were marginalized claiming their inherent worth and dignity granted by God. And whenever Jesus was talking about the kingdom of God, the reign of God on earth, he was talking about a place wherever that was fully realized, wherever people were able to fully embrace their human dignity and their rights granted under God. And so, Jesus was executed not to die for our sins, but Jesus was executed because he stood up to the Roman Empire for demanding these things, for demanding that people live their lives in such a way that they were that they were working on behalf of the marginalized, that those who were marginalized, the people to whom Jesus was speaking, were granted their worth and dignity. So sorry, Mark, that was a long answer, but it was
I love it.
question.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And all of that kind of matched up then with the movie's themes also makes me sort of think about how in real life, think about how we all, in some ways, it's not an identical in terms of looks tether, but we all have tethers or even multiple tethers out there that would be living our lives if their circumstances had been different growing up, some for the better, some for the worse.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, is that just something about the way that life is, or does it really actually point to a broken and heartless system? Or is it a little of both? Got a little philosophical there. Couldn't help it.
I think you're right. I think you're right on the money, though, Mark. That like we ought to struggle with those questions and to say even those of us who struggle in the United States, are living a life that is richer than most of the world. And people living in such extreme poverty. And I think that's something that we ought to be struggling with and asking ourselves. Is this just a broken system? And is there a way to create a more just system where everyone has enough?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to sneak in one more question. It goes off to a little bit of a different take on what we're seeing here, although it's very present in the movie. Like I said, there's lots of ways to take the metaphors that are here. That you can take all kinds of meanings from the metaphors. And one of the ones that struck me, specifically in Adelaide and Red, was how trauma is frequently navigated differently by folks living in different class realities. So do you think that's really a reality? And if so, what should we be doing about it, particularly like those of us who identify as Christians?
So it's definitely a reality. And one of the biggest issues that we have in the United States today is access to mental health care. And even those who theoretically can afford it, it is tough to get insurance to cover mental health care. It is tough to even get hooked up with a provider. And I think a lot of people have trauma. And, it's not all like, being in war kind of trauma, like Addie's dad says, right? Like, she hasn't been in Vietnam. She wasn't in Nam. Why does she have trauma? Why does she have PTSD?
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
A lot of people have unprocessed trauma and need, access to mental health care, or all kinds of things. All of us, I think, at some point in our lives have things that we need to work through, that we just need someone to compassionately listen to us and help us process. And it's certainly class related as to whether or not we have access to that help that we all need or not. So as Christians, I think this is an ethical issue. This is a fundamental issue. And I think that Jesus was actually commenting a lot, whether we realize it or not, on mental health care. And so I think a lot of the stories that we see in the Bible, if you'll permit me for a minute to go off on this, Mark, I think that, the things that we misunderstand in our modern interpretation, like things like exorcisms, things like healings, a lot of those are really responses to to mental health care. They're commentary on mental health care. They're not meant to be taken literally, but they're addressing the situation in an ancient way, in the way that they understood. And so Jesus, at least as portrayed in the Gospels, is someone who is going around and trying to help people where they are, in the way that they understood, to live better lives. And I think as Christians, that's our goal is to help people to be able to have access to services and free of charge, affordable, that people ought to be able to. Everybody deserves that. It's a basic human right.
Yeah,
what do you
completely
think?
agree. Oh, I completely agree, and I think it might be a bigger point of what Peele is trying to make than has been recognized so far. I mean, just the fact that he had Red and Adelaide switch places, and then we see the tether, Red, because she's now in a higher class system, actually comes out doing very well and is a very functional and a great parent and all of these great things. And then the person who came from the higher class system has their trauma and goes to what's the representation of the lower class and has all these issues and is trying to, I think that there's a real clear commentary here. And I think part of the commentary, since we're talking about classism, goes back to what we talked about last week of me believing that part of what we were talking about was the dangers of capitalism and how that impacts folks. And classism changes how capitalism impacts you. And in the mental health area, that's definitely one of the clear places where capitalism makes sure that the folks that are in lower class have more issues because of their lack of ability to get the resources that are necessary. So I think that this might be yet another movie where he's addressing capitalism, at least in some ways, and the dangers of it.
Yeah. Great point, Mark. Great point.
Well, we could go on and on. This is such a complex show. You can watch it on the surface and just say, oh, it's spooky. But if you're really paying attention, he's saying so much. We could ask a lot more questions, but we are at over time for this segment. So, and as we always at this point start chomping at the bit to get to our favorite section, the Make Me Look Stupid segment. So we'll take a quick drop and we'll come back on the other side.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Jesus Show. Thanks for sticking with us. We are in our final segment, the Make Me Look Stupid segment, where sometimes we try to make our co-hosts look stupid and sometimes we just ask questions that we are curious about. But I will say, as we're moving into the segment, Mark, that this episode reminds me of one of the reasons why I love the Moonshine Jesus Show is because, we take these shows and we really delve in deep to the stuff that these shows are telling. And I really love being able to engage with pop culture in that way because it makes my faith more meaningful. And so I appreciate that and appreciate this chance to be together. And in thinking about my faith, one of the things that stood
Mhm.
out to me
Yeah.
was the biblical quote. And I talked about the biblical quote last week. And so I thought I
Right.
would do that again this week. I wanted to
All
ask
right.
you about Jeremiah 11:11, which is
All right.
where, we see this kind of end times guy with a
All right.
sign.
And his
Holding up
doppelganger has it 11:11 on his forehead.
That's right. That's right.
Yep.
So, no, I just want to know if you can quote Jeremiah 11:11 from memory. I'm just kidding.
Nope. Nope.
Nope. Me neither. What do you know? That was
Callback. You see my callback to nope. Nope.
nope. We both look stupid there because I don't know that either. Except that I wrote it down. Jeremiah 11:11
Yep.
is, therefore, thus says the Lord, assuredly, I am going to bring disaster upon them that they cannot escape. Though they cry out to me, I will not listen to them. So, Mark, what do you think that quote has to do with the movie? What do you think Jordan Peele is trying to say with that theological excerpt?
I'm going to go. Well, actually, I'm going to save part of my answer for my question to you. Actually,
Ooh, okay, I like this.
I think the scripture itself is one, particularly in the Old Testament, when we hear something being put into God's voice, that God is judging people or coming down on them. It's frequently the people trying to understand what's happening to them and putting it in the voice of God to bring greater understanding, or to remove it enough that it doesn't, like, what we can't do anything about this. And I think in this particular verse in Jeremiah, part of what's going on is the people have sort of forgotten where they came from, and God's saying, because you've forgotten where you came from, you're going to receive this judgment. And I do think that that's kind of part of what Jordan Peele's movie is about, is that we've all forgotten that at some point we've all been struggling. We've all had difficult time. We've all forgotten ultimately where we come from. And we have made other people suffer because of it. And that ruin comes to a civilization when that's your approach to it. So if I had to eke something out of it, that's what I would pull out of it. I'm not really sure that that's why he used it. I'm not even sure he used it because, other than it sounds scary and maybe another reason. But what was your thought?
Yeah, I think he used it because it sounds scary, and because the tethers are bringing disaster upon the people to whom they are tethered. Although I think it is interesting that Red, whenever she's speaking, talks about how she saw God, and how in that experience she decides that she basically needs to come and lessen the class divide,
Right.
which I think is interesting. But yeah, I think the point that you make is so important, that that in the Hebrew Bible, when we're reading these things, that we are reading a theological justification for a reality. And if we would approach the entire Bible in that way, I think we would be a lot better off. People trying to understand their circumstances and writing their theology, into the text, instead of like viewing the text as something that was God delivered for us in the 21st century to understand in the correct way. But if we were to look at people's socio-historical context, I know we talk about this a lot, but damn, if we would just
it's important.
If we would just look at people's socio-historical context and try to allow that to inform the way that we read the text, and to say, maybe these people had lives that were, bad, or maybe at times good, and they were trying to figure out what that meant, just like the rest of us. They're trying to figure out how God is a part of all of this. So anyway,
Absolutely.
yes, I appreciate that. How about you? You got a question for me?
All right, so you brought up Jeremiah 11:11.
Yes.
So 11 shows up a lot in this movie. You've got the Bible verse. Adelaide's Carney Prize was number 11. The time
The
when
clock,
the clock was 11:11, and that's when everything bad starts happening. When Dad's watching the baseball game, the score is 11-11. When his best friend's watching the news is on channel 11.
11, huh? Yeah.
What's the deal with 11 here?
Okay, so in all fairness, I only caught Jeremiah 11:11 and the
There were
clock
probably other
being
ones. Those are just the
11:11.
ones that I caught.
Yeah. So maybe a callback to the verse to remind us that that's important, or
Could be.
maybe I'm going to make something up on the fly here.
All right, love it, love it.
Maybe like like it's showing the 11 colon and the 11 that there are equal numbers, right? And so that they ought to be equal no matter what
All right,
side of
all
the
right,
colon that
all
they're on. Just like
right.
the people below the surface
Turn them
and
this
above
way.
the surface,
All right.
yeah, that they ought to be equal no matter what side of the surface.
I like that.
they're
I
on.
like that.
That's something I just pulled out. Yeah. So
I like
tell me
that.
what you think.
That is not the direction I went in, but I do like it. But I do think the number 11. I think Jordan Peele came up with, because we saw in Nope him using, was it 6 that he was it 6 or 9?
He did, yeah.
He used
6, right? It
throughout.
was 6.
I think it was 6.
Yeah, 6.
Yeah, he used it a bunch. I think that he likes this kind of implied spookiness of numerology and stuff. And I think he picked 11. And I think that's where he came up with Jeremiah 11:11. He just started looking for Bible verses that had 11 in it that seemed scary and daunting and like bad things are going to happen to you. That's why I really think it was Jeremiah 11:11, which is why I told you I'd come back to this. I think he picked 11:11 because it's like a doppelganger.
Oh,
One standing next to one, 2 people standing together. I
I
feel
like
that
that.
was
Yeah.
part of what he was doing, and that he wanted that theme to run through, and that's why
I
he
like
picked
it.
Jeremiah
I like
11:11,
it.
because it was a Bible verse that had 11 that pretty much worked with what he was trying to do.
I like that. I think
I don't
that's
know.
good. I think that's good. Yeah. Good thought, Mark.
Who knows?
this
Who
has
knows?
been- who knows? Who knows? Yeah. But
I got to
this has
say,
been-
you were about to say this has been fun. I think Peele writes some of the best stuff, and it's so much fun to peel back the layers and figure out figure out what he was doing. And I think this one in particular, he left as wide open as he could for geeks like us to be able to play with it and try to understand and get meaning out of it. I love it, love it, love it.
Yeah, and I love the last look between
That was one of my
who's
questions.
really
actually.
red, yeah, and
You
her son.
You didn't steal any of my questions.
Any of them.
But I'll
So
throw
that's
out a
why
little-
I'm talking about it now, because I
Good,
can't
good.
get through a show,
Right.
without talking about
There-
something
there-
that was going to be your.
There
question.
is this little theory I have.
No look. Okay. Yeah.
I
You,
kind
Okay, wait, I
of feel like her son
uh-huh.
also got switched out.
I think so too. I think so
Yeah,
too.
yeah. All right,
Yeah.
excellent. We're on the same page.
I
I,
mean,
love it. So I wasn't
there's-
crazy. I wasn't crazy.
No, you're not crazy. And the look.
That look.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some
Yeah.
people try.
They knew.
I saw that some people were saying that it was like frightened or like, oh no. It felt like
No,
understanding,
more
didn't
than
it? It's
that.
like
It was
we're here.
understanding.
Us,
And the way that
us, right?
the way she smiled back
Yeah.
at him. And
agree.
you're right. That's what makes the Jordan Peele movie so great, is
Mhm.
that he leaves
Gosh.
room for us to think about it, for us to talk about it. And so this has been fun. I've enjoyed these last couple of weeks. But we're
Yeah.
gonna pass Halloween tomorrow, Mark.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
this sci-fi horror social commentary genre has been fun, but maybe we ought to get back to some of our sci-fi stuff. And so
I am with you.
I was thinking maybe a sci-fi show next week. Does that sound okay?
Which sounds fantastic. Time to get back to real solid sci-fi. I like it. I like it.
Yeah. And
What
I
are
don't
you
know
thinking
about you.
though?
Well, I've been watching Star Trek Lower Decks, the
it's one of
animated
the-
Star Trek show. You
For
like
Star
that?
Trek geeks, it's such an insider Star Trek geek kind of show. Like
Yeah.
they give. I mean, if you're not a Star Trek geek, you can enjoy it, but they give
Yeah, you
so
can.
much. They give so much
Yeah.
to the geek in every episode. I love it. Yeah,
I
Love
do too. So there's one episode left. It's going to drop this week.
Mhm.
Why don't we go next week and talk about all of season 4 of Star Trek
Well,
Lower Decks?
what if we do the last half of season 4 because they took a break,
Okay.
right? So the
Okay.
last 4 or 5 episodes, whenever the break was, and they came back
Okay.
in August or September.
Okay, I like
Because-
that. The last
because
half.
It'd be really hard to cover all of them, frankly. They're so good.
That's true. I like that, Mark. There's
All
a
right.
lot there, and we're going to delve in deep to the second half of season
Mhm.
4 of Star Trek Lower Decks.
Love
Okay,
it.
friends, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Moonshine Jesus Show.